Good evening, and thank you for tuning into House Calls, a conversation with our community. I'm Terry Purcell, President and CEO of North York General Hospital Foundation, and it is my privilege to introduce our panel. A warm welcome to Nicole German, Chair of the Foundation Board and Executive Director of the Maddie Project, established to honor her daughter Madeline 5 years ago. She is also Global Head and VP Digital Marketing, Sales and Growth at Scotiabank. Nicole will be sharing her perspective as an advocate for youth mental health, a parent, and will also guide House Calls as our host. Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Terry. Pleased to be here.
Next, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Rohit Mahindra, a physician in our
Charlotte
and Lewis Steinberg Emergency, a haven of care and compassion for this community, especially over the past 6 months. Dr. Mahindra is skilled in recognizing and caring for those experiencing crisis in mental health and, of course, any other type of medical situation. Welcome, Dr. Mahindra.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks.
And we simply couldn't have a panel on mental health care without a family physician, the quarterback of your family's overall health and well-being. I'd like to welcome Dr. Stephanie Klein, one of the many incredible doctors associated with our hospital. Dr. Klein's interest in community medicine includes a focus on geriatrics, and as a family practitioner, she is the primary navigator for her patients' mental health care. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks, Terry, for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion this evening.
Wonderful. And tonight, our behind-the-scenes moderator is our own Christine Lasky, VP Communication and Donor Experience. She'll be asking our panelists questions, although you'll only hear her voice. And before I happily hand this over to Nicole, I'd like to gently remind our community that any advice offered this evening is not meant to replace that of your own doctor or any other mental health professionals. I'm looking forward to an engaging hour, and over to you, Nicole. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Terry. So tonight is our third House Calls. So thank you to everyone that's joining us this evening. Tonight, we're really going to talk about health and wellness with the increased stress on our community, with students going back to school, so many people integrating back into these new normals, or I like to call the next normal, and the fear of COVID, the second wave potentially. Managing mental health through the perspectives of our panel is very timely. So I'm excited to have this conversation both with Dr. Mahindra, Dr. Klein, as well as the community. I'd like to start off this evening with really each of us sharing a little bit about what we've observed over the last 6 months with regards to key issues people are experiencing relative to their mental health and COVID-19. So I will start by sharing, and then I'll get a little words from the two doctors. But I think, like so many of us, if we turn back the time to 6 months ago, we didn't expect that we would be confronted with such change that we've had. So we've seen really workplaces that have moved completely virtually. We've seen stress on economical times with change of businesses not being able to open or operate as normal. And we've also seen many family members being isolated. So whether that's more elderly people or young people having to homeschool. And I think now being 6 months later, I've been incredibly amazed to see the resilience of our communities. And really, I think mostly is the kindness of others helping out each other. And so I think that's been a wonderful thing during these challenging times. But I'd love to hear Dr. Mahindra. Maybe you can give us a sense of what you've been seeing or feeling over the last 6 months.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I think you did kind of a good job of describing how much of a shift it has been for everybody, and it's affected everyone in different ways and in a lot of aspects of their life. And I think people are coping with it in different ways. They're having to find new ways to cope with the stress. And I agree with you that it's quite amazing to see how much people are able to do and able to adapt and to move on. Because I think the future, taking every day at a time, is going to be the most important thing. Dr. Klein, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with what you guys have shared. I think when I reflect on the last 6 months, I think the biggest challenge was just the uncertainty that we all faced at the outset. Naturally, we are wanting to have a sense of control over our lives, and we completely lost that. A lot of people lost their jobs, and there were financial difficulties. Those who were still working had to adjust to working from home, but also parenting 24/7. So I think people faced a lot of exhaustion with that, and affected their stress levels, caused more anxiety, lower moods. And we were faced with so much difficult news in the media as well. And it was hard to know what to believe. So we had to adapt to a lot of change in a very short period of time. And typically, as a doctor, I would tell people to maintain your self-care routines, like going to the gym and spending time with friends. But that was also affected during the pandemic. We couldn't go out and do the things that we typically would enjoy doing, and that bring us the joy that we need to get through the stress. So I think the culmination of all those factors together really took its toll on people's mental health. And we got a little bit of a break over the summer, I felt, when we saw the case numbers go down and some nice weather to enjoy. But I sense that people are concerned about what lies ahead, and I hope the discussion tonight gives some helpful strategies moving forward.
I think that's great. I think also in early days, or the first number of months, and I think people were starting to shift now, but was really that we felt that we had to perform at the regular levels, right? And so whether it was around staying in shape and fitness, whether it was helping our kids be educated, whether it was performing at work, and the reality is that in some cases that just was not possible, as you mentioned. But we kind of, I found myself personally, and a lot of my family and friends were like, we still sort of felt like we should be, right? And not, so kind of cutting ourselves a little bit of slack, and recognizing that, what, it's different now, and we can't actually, do things the way that we used to, or even have those expectations, right? I think that's really key. So thanks for sharing. I think now we'll just step right into taking some questions from the community. So Christine, do you want to open us up?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone, and I'm so glad that you could join us. Our first question actually is for you, Nicole. As a parent with kids going back to school, what are some of the ways that you're preparing for your family given this time of transition and this period of continued uncertainty?
So that's a great question. September is always a time of transition. And for those of us that have kids or have had kids, every child is different. And so I think recognizing, in this transition time, getting back to school, getting ready, getting prepared. So I think there's all the usual things, is getting back into routine, starting to go to bed at a good time, and then preparing yourself with, the usual schools. But school is very different. So one of the things that we've been doing at home is really starting to get accustomed to wearing a mask around the house. And while that, might seem kind of odd, when we go in and out of the house wearing a mask for short periods of time, it's not such a big deal, right? And or you get in your car, you get out of your car, or you go into a store, but actually having to wear it for a longer period of time, especially for younger people, or if they haven't done it, can be a bit overwhelming, or they're fiddling with it. And so that's one of the things that we've really started practicing and getting used to. And so that it just becomes almost like an accessory for the kids in our family. And then also making sure that they have a lot of access to things like their masks, but also little hand sanitizers for their pockets and what have you. And I have, two boys, one who sometimes is a bit absent-minded. So we've got those all over the house, right, to make sure that that's available. And then really turning to routine, right? I think, again, what to expect. So just communicating about how things are going to be different, getting into a schedule. But those are some of the things that we're doing at home so far. And we're just about to get started. So we'll see how it goes. Dr. Klein, can you provide maybe some advice to parents and young patients as they navigate going back to the classroom?
Yeah, for sure. I really love how you talked about routines, because that was going to be one of the key comments that I made as well. But first, I'd say if there's parents tuning in, that if you're feeling concerned or anxious about sending the kids back, that's a completely normal reaction to the abnormal situation that we find ourselves in right now. So I would have some self-compassion and not blame yourselves if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed. Now, we know that sending the kids back to school is going to be beneficial for them. They've been cooped up at home a very long time. And so being able to have them reconnect with their peers, meet up with their teachers again, learn in the structured environment has so many benefits. So if you find yourself thinking about the concerns you have about risk of COVID, bring it back to the positive messaging that this is going to have a lot more benefit than we think right now. If your kids are concerned about going back because things have changed and what they're used to is no longer, I think creating the routine and then involving them in keeping themselves safe. So having them choose out a mask that is funky or exciting to them, or a hand sanitizer that has a unique smell or something that keeps them engaged, I think will help them want to stay safe and keep the rest of your family safe. But if you do notice that they develop any new symptoms, the key there is obviously having your kids stay home, get tested, and follow the school guidelines as well.
I think that's some great points, Dr. Klein. An interesting thing I heard from someone was to associate mask time with screen time. So sure, you want to watch TV, you got to wear a mask. And I think that's a good way to just kind of build some familiarity with wearing masks for long periods of time. And I think it may be helpful for them adapting. I think it's also important to acknowledge the anxiety for children, to acknowledge that you're feeling anxious, that teachers are feeling anxious, that the children are feeling anxious. As Dr. Klein mentioned, this is an abnormal situation. It's very different from 6 months ago. And I think it's very, very normal for kids and their parents and their teachers who all care for them to feel anxious how things are going. And just remember that everyone is doing their best. And I'm quite sure that the kids' well-being is everyone's priority. So just remember that we're all interested in keeping the kids healthy and safe, but we also want them to grow and thrive. So.
I just have another question for Nicole. Thanks, doctors. That's great. In your experience as a parent, what do you say are the main challenges that your children are facing today and in the very near future? And can you suggest any coping mechanisms that have worked for you and your family and those that are involved in your not-for-profit work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would say in the present moment, there's so much unknown. So I think we're going to see sort of some transitions. I would say in general, in my experience, whether it's in, with my family or community, is that, as children grow and change and transition, and depending on sort of their social environments or their overall environment, is that they might begin to struggle, right? And they might have anxiety or stress. And I think for me, not so much coping mechanism is just, I would say, sort of eyes wide open, right? So as soon as you start as a parent to feel something in your gut or see change in your child, or even your children's friends, it's just to kind of flag it, right? And I think just really, don't think it's a phase, but really just to say, that's interesting, that's different, right? And so I think, one of the points or sort of idea is about opening those dialogue. And with the Maddie Project, we talk about sort of sparking conversations about mental health. And so that's very comfortable. It's really about dinner time conversation. It's about being able to self-express, even as a young child, to say, I had a hard time focusing, and because often they may not be able to understand what's going on. And so I think watching for young people when there's change, or when you're hearing from, their coaches or their teachers, or seeing different behavior is really, the key to kind of keep your eyes open for.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We've been chatting about, of course, children, and they're very important to us. But we have a live question coming in, and this is for the doctors. Are there any isolation warning signs one should look for, specifically in the senior community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think isolation in seniors can be something that's very subtle. It can be just a slight change in their mood, change in their appetite. They seem a bit more confused or a bit more off their baseline. Anything that seems different or new, I think, in the senior community should spark a bit of a warning flag to take a little bit closer look at your family member, maybe have them see their primary care doctor, just to make sure that there's nothing else going on. I think isolation in the best of times is difficult for our senior population, and engaging them in different ways that you can, whether it's frequent phone calls, quick visits to stop by the door or the window, if they're on email or text messages, pictures of family and things, just to keep them involved in the circle and engaged can be very, very helpful. But anything that seems different or off, I think, would be important just to sit down with the family member and make sure that everything's going okay. And senior population often are reluctant to admit, I think, sometimes about how they're feeling, or they may not just be aware that the way they're feeling is because of their mood or because of their isolation. So spend some time with them to get to know what's really happening with them, and I'm sure they would appreciate it.
I was just wondering, another question that's come in. Can each of you, the doctors specifically, provide a quick technique that may help manage or lower anxiety?
Thanks for that question. I think a super simple technique that I tell patients, especially if they're experiencing panic symptoms. So panic symptoms are if you start to notice your heart rate increasing, your breathing rate increasing. Some people might get some chest tightness or tremulous feeling. Would be to do something called box breathing. So imagine there's a box and you have to time your breath along the sides of the box. So you would take a deep inhale for a few seconds and then hold your breath at the top for a few seconds. Exhale and hold your breath at the bottom. And in doing that, it slows down the breathing, which will slow down your heart rate, and it gives you something else to focus on if you find that you're spinning in a lot of thoughts that are difficult to control. And another strategy, I'd say, we've talked about uncertainty a bit, and my comment there is, in the face of uncertainty, to try to assume that everything is neutral rather than negative. I think we have these biases toward negative thinking that we might jump to conclusions or worst case scenarios. And more often than not, things have a way of working out. And so trying to think positively and focus on the things that we do have some control on in the present moment is going to help you feel better when you find yourselves kind of spinning in those thoughts. So it's a cognitive reframing strategy. So that would be my main tips.
I love that, Dr. Klein. I know for one thing, you had mentioned earlier a little bit about the media, right? There's a lot of information. And I think too, the idea of keeping informed, but not necessarily being overwhelmed by media, because also often particularly when we're at home all day, right, is if you're just watching the news over and over and over again, sometimes it becomes overwhelming. And so that idea of just really making sure that you have the facts and the information rather than constantly being flooded with it. I don't know if that's something that you would consider as well, but just, almost monitoring how much of that you're intaking, because I can feel it overwhelming as well, right? So that constant influx of, difficult information, right? So.
Yeah, but I routinely was telling people that, you have to limit the amount of time watching the news and the amount of time that you spend thinking about the pandemic. And that is something we do have control over. So rather than spending all this time from the television, why don't you go out for a walk or do something with your kids and take your mind off of it? So really good strategies for sure.
Dr. Mohindra, do you have any tips in this area?
I think Nicole and Dr. Klein have both brought up great points. I think sometimes also just acknowledging for just a moment that you're not feeling well for whatever reason is important to just label it and just remind yourself that, these emotions are a normal part of the human experience of how we're navigating this very unique situation in our history. And everyone is going through something at some time or the other related to the pandemic. So, just give yourself permission just for a minute to feel what it is you're feeling. That's okay. And oftentimes, most emotions will pass. So if you're able to just get through that next moment, get through the next moment, you'll find that oftentimes you'll be able to kind of get through whatever crisis you're feeling or the stressful situation you're in, and move on to kind of whatever you need to do next.
So we have a live question from the audience. So I'm going to read that, and I'm going to direct this one to Dr. Klein. My sense is that people are tired of being cooped up, tired of being careful, tired of being scared. Their collective fatigue is making some people careless. One reason COVID-19 is rising sharply again. Any tips on how to maintain vigilance?
Yeah, I sense a little bit of frustration. I think everyone is feeling that way because we've made so much progress over the summer months, and it's a little discouraging to see the cases starting to increase. I guess my comment there is we only really have control over our own actions. And I know it's stressful hearing about outbreaks or people, or even just seeing people not wearing the masks or having these gatherings, and that can wear on you. And so in order to get through this and to feel better about things, I would bring it back to focusing on what you can do. And so if you can keep your mask on and keep distances from people and focus on the things that are going well, I would reiterate that's the main message here, and that we can't predict what's going to happen no matter how hard we try. And practicing mindfulness and being present, I think, is a key strategy.
Great, thank you. This is a question for Dr. Mahindra. As an emergency physician, are there different types of patient issues you're seeing in emergency that you haven't seen pre-COVID-19 relative to mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christine. Thanks. I think there's a couple of things that have sort of come our way. The first is that I think a lot of patients who suffer from mental illnesses have found ways to cope at home and in their community. And I think a lot of that support structure was disrupted during the pandemic. So it was hard for them to check in with family, to check in with their healthcare providers. And so we definitely saw an increased number of patients who weren't coping with their symptoms and weren't able to keep their symptoms under control in a safe way. And I think the second one was that stress affects people in a lot of different ways. And they don't always realize it. And so they were often presenting to the emergency department with very real symptoms, but I think asking them to acknowledge that some of their symptoms certainly may be related to stress and anxiety and coping and lack of sleep and inability to exercise and eat well and all these kinds of things. It has a huge impact on how people were feeling. And it certainly was interesting for us to kind of see that shift in how people were presenting with their different symptoms.
This is a follow-up question for Dr. Mahindra. When would you suggest patients come into the emergency for both mental health symptoms and physical symptoms?
Yeah, thanks. I think for mental health, obviously, if you're worried about yourself or a family member or somebody in your circle, it's important to get help as soon as possible. Certainly any thoughts or actions that indicate they would harm themselves or harm other people, or they're not able to take care of themselves properly, I would certainly get immediate medical attention. If you can't, then calling your 911 or local crisis lines to get assistance is very important. For physical symptoms, I mean, there's a lot of things depending on your medical background, but certainly any pain in your chest, especially when you're, walking or running or going upstairs, any trouble breathing, a fever that doesn't go away or a fever that's not associated with a cough or a runny nose, or anything that seems worrisome to you in terms of a family member's health or how they look. It's often a good idea to bring them in to be assessed.
Thank you. This is a question for Nicole. Nicole, your involvement with North York General Foundation began after your daughter, Maddie, lost her life to depression at age of 14. I understand this tragedy was the catalyst for the Maddie Project, which you founded as a tribute to her and to spark change to youth mental health care. Can you share your thoughts about the Maddie Project and what you would like other parents to know?
Sure. Thanks, Christine, for asking. Our family went on a journey where, having someone struggle with severe mental health was brand new and very unknown to us. Wasn't something that we widely had heard about, frankly. And when Madeline was struggling, we kept it very private, mostly because she felt that she would be judged. What we learned when she passed away, or what happened when she passed away, we were very transparent on how she died and what she died from. And it was like we had opened these floodgates of people coming to tell us their story of, themselves, other family members that had been struggling. And so what we learned was that there's a whole ecosystem of people that are not openly speaking around mental health issues or struggles because of the stigma. And so that was really, driven by the community to sort of open the conversation or spark the conversation about youth mental health. And I think, in hindsight, I've had, friends who've had kids that have been, sick or gone to the hospital to have their appendix taken out or whatever. And, you speak openly of that. Madeline, when she was in hospital, nobody really knew. But it's really when kids are severely ill, it's an illness, right? And I think we need to be speaking more openly about it. And I think that was really the catalyst for us. And the community was sort of community driven, right? The demand and again, after the fact, when you look at the statistics of people that will suffer, it's likely that you will know people that do, suffer of some degree with some type of, depression or mental health challenge. And so we're all touched by it, and it should be just treated like any other concern in your healthcare. And so that was really our catalyst for starting the Maddie Project and getting much more involved and engaged with North York General Hospitals and the foundation specifically.
Thank you. Those are really important insights for our community to hear. Thank you. I'd now like to take another live question, and I'll address this one to Dr. Klein. And then if Dr. Mahindra has something to say in addition, that would be great. Since the pandemic will be with us for a long time, at least that's what I think some of the experts are saying, are there any tips or advice for resiliency?
That's a great question. And yes, I think we need to expect that this is our new normal for the foreseeable future. When I think of resiliency, I think of the ability to bounce back through adversity or through challenging times. And it's hard to go through life without having those times. And everyone reacts differently. I'd say some of the key strategies are having a self-awareness of when you're no longer in a state of wellness, but when you start to drop into having more stress or lower moods or poor sleep. It can be hard to recognize, and everyone needs different things to keep them well. So building on strategies for self-care, like maintaining an exercise routine and eating well, time for yourself, time connecting with others are all going to be helpful in coping through difficult times. The other piece is an acceptance of change, I would say, and the ability to adapt to change. So a lot already has changed in our world, and
I think Dr. Klein is having some internet challenges there. Dr. Mahindra, is there anything?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to pick up on some things that Dr. Klein was mentioning, I think making sure that you have a solid foundation, you know, that you're eating well, you're sleeping well, hydrating, fresh air, can make a big difference. Limiting screen time is actually very important in sort of helping you maintain a good sleep cycle. And as we mentioned before, just kind of giving you a break from all the stress and anxiety of the world around us. But I think it's also helpful to make sure that you give yourself something to look forward to, you know, whether it's a takeout dinner with the family or, you know, a trip to the ice cream store around the corner, or, you know, just watching TV on a rainy Sunday. But give yourself permission and space to make those things a priority, so that you have something to kind of boost yourself up to get through the next challenge, whatever it is, and remind yourself what's really important for you and what you value. I think that really helps people get through some of these very, very challenging situations.
The other thing I would add, just on the topic of resiliency, I think too, is that, you know, we're all different, and we all have, you know, moments in time where we might feel more resilient than the next person. So I think really recognizing or providing compassion to others, right? And so when you're interacting, whether it's, you know, with family members or, you know, work, and just understanding that somebody might be, you know, struggling at a moment in time, and so to kind of, you know, just be, you know, overly sensitive, I think, to that too, right? And either to understand that, or just to kind of give them space, is that, you know, not everybody might be as resilient as you're feeling in that moment, right? And so I think, you know, during some of these times, I know, you know, just in the day-to-day things from a work standpoint, was we, you know, when we shifted into COVID, it was quite demanding from a workplace standpoint, and we really had to constantly just be checking in with each other almost, right, to make sure, you know, how everybody was progressing in the teams, because you know, especially when you're virtual and you can't see people eye to eye, you don't really know. So I think those concepts of like checking in and making sure, you know, how people are doing, and just, you know, not for any other reason, just other than just to check in as well, is important.
Thanks, Nicole. There are a bunch of questions that we've kind of lumped together, and this is really for Dr. Klein. These are stressful times, no doubt, and some people are finding it hard to cope. Dr. Klein, you have a special interest in older adults, and we have had a number of questions from the segment of our population that are struggling with loneliness due to social distancing, a decrease in activity, and a fear of losing independence. What advice would you have for them?
I think everyone's aware that the pandemic was, I'd say, particularly challenging for the seniors in our community. We tried to safeguard their physical health by saying stay home, and we didn't have as many visitors into long-term care, but I think what we did see was increased rates of the feelings of loneliness, lower moods, increased depression, and that took its toll, and I think caused even physical impairment for some people. And I think as we move into the fall and winter months, that it's normal to have this fear or this concern of losing independence. So my advice to that is to try to stay connected however you can. I know this is not new advice, but having regularly scheduled telephone calls. If you are technologically inclined, then the Zoom meetings, or even just writing letters to old friends can be good. This might be an opportunity for the grandkids to teach their grandparents how to text message or go on Facebook, which brings me to my next point, actually, is that if you're struggling with loneliness, it can be great to pick up a new hobby and learn new skills. So getting on the computer or trying a new recipe or puzzles or anything that keeps your mind active and takes your mind off of everything else that's going on is going to help you continue to live well throughout the winter months. And the other piece of it is a lot of the seniors programs unfortunately had to be shut down because we want to avoid the gathering. And it meant a lot of seniors weren't doing as much exercise and activity that we know is extremely important for their health. So I encourage you to move in whatever way possible, whether it's following a home video or dancing or chair exercises, it's going to be beneficial for your physical and mental health to maintain a good exercise routine. I've heard of some seniors get companion pets during the pandemic. Obviously, there's a lot of responsibility in taking on a pet, but definitely can help with feelings of isolation or loneliness. But again, I think Dr. Mahindra had touched on this earlier, is if you're really struggling with feeling low, or appetite isn't the same, your energy isn't the same, sometimes geriatric depression can be very subtle. So if you're noticing that, then reach out to your family doctor, because there are other treatments that are beneficial and effective in helping you feel better.
Great, thank you. I have a question for Nicole. Nicole, you're a very busy working mother, probably outside the home and inside the home now, profile position with Scotiabank, and even find time to be a new board chair, thank you very much, at North York General Foundation. How are you practicing your own self-care during COVID-19? And can you give any advice to others that are trying to balance going into work or working from home along with home life?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I would say I always have good intentions. Not sure I always manage it perfectly by any stretch of the means, but I think I do think that notion of self-awareness really, the one thing that was fortunate for me is that I've worked virtually in my career for a very long time, right? And so kind of working from home or being on the computer a lot, or, wasn't something new for me. But you have to really own your schedule and your programming, particularly when people have other family members at home, right? And so I think it's really about preparing a schedule and sort of giving yourself that time. So making sure that you make time for your exercise, that you take a lunch break, and you really commit to time to be able to get your things done. Because we're sitting at computers, or even for the kids, they were sitting, in front of their screens doing schoolwork. Really sort of taking a break. So again, what I said at the beginning of the call was not being able to continue to operate at the same standards that we did when we were all face-to-face and doing different scheduling. So, for me, it's about exercising, between 3 and 5 days a week. It's one of the joys that have been for me. I'm not the best cook, and I don't necessarily love to cook, but since we've been back at home, we've been cooking at home every night. So teaching my elder son how to barbecue, coming up with new menus ideas, because we're not racing off to sports. So I think there's been a lot of positive, at least for me, having the extra quality time and not always rushing. But also really recognizing, when I'm tired and when I'm struggling. And I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago that just sort of said that it's not good enough just to shut down your work and your computer. Like, you really need to take your mind off. And so at our work, we've really been encouraging people to take their vacation time, right? A lot of people said, I'm going to put vacation on hold because I'm stuck at home. But really stepping away from work and taking your personal days or vacation is actually even more important now, and turning your mind to something different. Whether that's playing an instrument, but just getting it off sort of the work and sort of shifting it, it helps you refresh and come back. And so those are the things that I've, not just myself, but family, but also a lot of my team members and folks at the company have been doing to kind of help all of us really in that balance.
Thanks, Nicole. It's nice to hear how you've personally been coping. This is a question for Dr. Mahindra, and I think it's an interesting question that I'm sure many people wonder about. As an emergency doctor, how and when would you do a consult with a psychiatrist relative to mental health issues during this pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of an insight into the day-to-day lives of how the emergency department works. Our colleagues in psychiatry and mental health are doing a fantastic job of managing a big shift in the types of patients, the severity, acuity, outpatient resources that they no longer have access to, and they're doing an amazing job of keeping people healthy and safe. What we turn to them towards, when we turn towards them, we're really looking for help with patients who are at risk of harming themselves, or risk of harming other people. They can't take care of themselves. They're not doing well with their current social situation, or they're not getting the type of outpatient follow-up or treatment plan that they need. And our team in psychiatry and the crisis team are great at facilitating that and working with the patients to make that happen.
Great. And it's kind of a related question, but this one is for Dr. Klein. If someone comes into your office and they're particularly not coping well through this uncertain time and they feel they are in crisis, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I think a lot of people may find themselves in this situation. And it was Nicole who mentioned earlier that it's unfortunate that we still have a stigma and a shame associated with mental health conditions, that I don't think anyone would hesitate speaking to their doctor about their sore ankle. But when it comes to feeling depressed, I think a lot of people still have this fear or concern that it may be a sign of weakness, and may struggle with making that first call. So my message is that we can help and we want to help. And so if you are struggling, reach out to your family doctor, because oftentimes having that initial conversation and coming up with a plan can give you that sense of relief, and knowing that there's a way to start to feel better. But certainly if you're feeling like you're in a severe mental health crisis and have thoughts of harming yourself, then going to the emergency department or calling 911 is the best course of action.
There's another question along this line, but it's, what if they're concerned not for their own health, but for their children's health? And they come into your office seeking some guidance. What kind of guidance would you give them on that?
And that can be, I think, very common and a bit of a tricky situation. Sometimes kids or adolescents are not as open, or may not share the whole story. And so I think being in tune and attentive to what you're seeing, like if your child is not as engaged or not doing things that they ordinarily would enjoy doing, or if there's more outbursts, if they're not eating as well, then these are signs that you might want to speak to a doctor about it. And sometimes when I speak with parents, I think they're trying to figure it out on their own. And sometimes they think, oh, is this just adolescence, or was it just a bad day? I'd say if you have any ounce of concern, speak to a professional, because they can do a more thorough assessment. And oftentimes we have the opportunity to have a conversation with your child in private, and they may feel more open or comfortable discussing some concerns with us rather than with their parents. So yeah, my main advice is definitely to reach out and provide support and validation for what they might be experiencing in those situations.
Very good. Dr. Mahindra, are there successful examples of virtual mental health care that we can learn from at this time?
Definitely. I think the mental health team and I think a lot of mental health professionals are really looking to virtual care at this point as a way to engage patients from home. And I think it does have some benefits. It sometimes can be difficult, especially during the pandemic, to make it to appointments and to balance, work and life and family. So I think that's actually been working very well. And I know that it's actually much easier, I think, for patients to get follow-up care and continuity of care because of the virtual care efforts. And this is something that North York General has been doing, and I know a number of other organizations have been doing as well.
It's interesting. There are a number of holidays on the horizon, and people are just wondering, what advice would you have as they approach the number of different holidays that are coming up in the fall? Oh, pardon, Dr. Klein?
Yeah, I think this is obviously quite topical. And my perspective here is that life continues to go on despite the fact that we're in a pandemic. And again, we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. I think everyone is aware of the safe guidelines we've been given by public health, that in an ideal situation, we would like to maintain the distances and wear the masks. But I think we also have to consider our own quality of life and our well-being. And so if there's a special occasion that comes up that may only happen once in a while, like the birth of a grandchild or something significant, and it would be meaningful to you to have that experience, we have to weigh the pros and cons when it comes to understanding our risk of being exposed to COVID-19 and also trying to live out the lives that we want to live. So I think my message is we still need to be safe, and the numbers may change and we may have to be more vigilant as we head into the fall and the winter. But for right now, I think there are still safe ways to have these important gatherings. And we want people to feel like they can still connect with the people that are important in their lives.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dr. Klein. And I think it's important to realize there are things you can do to make it safe for you and for your family. If you do have an outdoor space, maximizing that, or using a public outdoor space, keeping masks on when possible, hand washing, providing hand sanitizer, and avoid, shared drinks and shared foods and things. It's a bit of an adjustment, but it still allows you to enjoy that time and special occasions together, but in ways that make it a bit safer for everyone.
I think that's great. I've been hearing, actually speaking with someone just today who had planned to get married and had planned to have a very large wedding where people were going to come from out of town. And, they had postponed it to November, and then they sort of felt, you know what, they just really wanted to get married. And so they actually scaled it down to about 10 people. And really, he said it was amazing because they were all in a very large venue wearing masks, and it was sort of, people that had been living like 2 by 2s, 6 feet apart. And he said, you know what, it didn't matter. We set it up properly. It was still, the most special and wonderful day and really a moment to remember. And so while these special occasions might logistically be a bit more challenging, but still can be very meaningful and I would say most definitely memorable, right? So I think it's interesting to hear how people are really shifting again back to the way that we used to do things. Is that we still can get married or do these special occasions, but they're often just in a different way. So with safety. So.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Nicole. This is an interesting question that I'd love you to answer. What are some ways that a non-family member can identify and support a child or teen experiencing stress during this time?
Yes, and I think that's really good. I mean, what I've found since being more engaged with this young community is that they're a lot better at articulating or speaking more openly about mental health. And so I've seen a real progression, or I'm always amazed if I compare to sort of my generation, the way that they speak more openly. And so I think that notion of having a space where you can be open and talk about it, right? So whether that's, with your friends or even just being direct, are you feeling anxious? Are you, just asking those questions, sort of opening those conversations so that people can feel more comfortable about talking about it. Watching for those changes. So when people are, different, sometimes canceling plans last minute or, maybe not participating in some of the team sports, but just kind of watching and identifying for that and flagging those types of things. But I also think, one of the most important things for young people is that they don't need to have the answer. And I think Dr. Klein mentioned this too, like even for parents, like you don't need to have the answer. It's just more about, and I would say, during this pandemic, you just feel kind of off, right? You feel it's sort of these waves of, I've been working from home, or is it because, you don't really know and you can't really even describe it. And so I think it's just being able to articulate to say, I don't know what's up, but I just don't feel myself, right? And that sort of thing. And so like allowing, that to be okay, right? And not to say that you've got, what it is or why. It's just to be able to express that. And so I think, for young people or young people's friends or is really about, opening those conversations, being transparent, talking about it often. I've got a son that's just started, first year university, and he's away from home. And so it's just lots of communication and sort of checking in, and not to be overburdened, but just lightweight conversation. And I think that idea of, if you can have access to technology, whether it's through FaceTime or video, just seeing somebody, because I think sometimes when you see them, you sort of can get a feel for, how are they really doing? Because I think sometimes somebody sounds different than they might look. So being just to have kind of quick informal check-ins, I think are, when most young people are very, used to those types of things as well. So I think those are some suggestions from my side.
Thanks, Nicole. Very sage advice. Is this our last? I think this might be our last question, and it came from the community. Dr. Klein, my grandkids are returning physically to the classroom, and I'm very concerned that at some point in time they will be exposed to COVID-19, especially when the cold weather sets in, and they visit me indoors. What precautions can I put in place?
Yeah, I think so. Now I can understand how that's a concern as the social bubbles are expanding a bit with the kids going back to school, and we still want to make sure that we're vigilant and protecting ourselves from that exposure. But at the same time, I know having that visit from the grandkids can bring a lot of joy. So what I guess my perspective here is to do the thing that will let you sleep at night. So some people who haven't left their homes at all, not even for groceries or going to the pharmacy, if you're that concerned about your risk to COVID-19, then it's probably not a great idea to have the grandkids combined visit. But if you're wanting to have that time with them, because there may not be a lot more time that you can spend, and it will help you get through these long winter months, then there are safe ways to do it. I think Dr. Mohindra mentioned this earlier. At least for now in the fall, if you can do outdoor visits, that's good, or shorter visits, making sure you keep the masks on, and using technology where you can. So I know we're repeating the same responses here. I think we're all adapting, and that's okay. And just remember that despite all these challenges and the feelings that we're missing out on things, just keep in mind the things that you do have, and keep a list of what you're grateful for, that you have grandkids to spend time with and talk with, and focus again on what we do have and the positive moments. So that would be my key takeaway.
Thank you very much. And I do have one closing question. And it's for Nicole. We know there's an increase in volume of mental health patients presenting to the emergency department. What is North York General doing to help our patients in this area?
Great. Yeah, I'd be happy to answer this. So in addition to the growing numbers, there's also the lack of secure and dedicated space for our vulnerable patients and families dealing with emergency mental health issues. The hospital and the foundation have recognized this need, and we're now creating a space that's just in the planning stages that will offer specialized mental health care in a therapeutic environment. So our goal is to raise $11 million to expand our current emergency department footprint, anchored by a new unit dedicated to emergency mental health care. And we're very excited to share this evening, tonight, for the first time publicly. So, mental health is a very important part of North York General Hospital, and we're, very committed at the foundation to be supporting this for our community and the patients that come to North York General Hospital.
Well, we look forward to hearing more about that in the days and weeks ahead. Well, that's it for our questions. I'll turn this back to you, Nicole, for our final remarks.
That's great. Thanks, Christine. Thanks for fielding us with lots of great questions. Hopefully everyone had the opportunity to share in some of the great information by Dr. Mahindra and Dr. Klein this evening. And we want to thank you all for being here. We will be following up with some of the questions that weren't able to be answered live and we will also be providing a recording of this. But before I close out, I just wanted to get some final words. Dr. Klein and Dr. Mahindra, just as we close out this evening, if you wanted to share any final thoughts. So Dr. Klein, would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I think this was a great conversation, and I hope that it was meaningful to our viewers. I think the main points here, we want to maintain our connections. We want to try to stay present. And I would just say to have faith that things have a way of working out. A couple other final remarks. Flu shots are going to be available soon. I've gotten a lot of questions about that. So assuredly your doctor will let you know about the process for receiving your flu shots, and they will be available say in a month or two. And if you are having symptoms, to go and get tested. The testing is available for free. I know the lines can be long. It's a sign that we are testing more, which is good because we'll be able to isolate and contact trace better. And I hope everyone stays safe and stays well.
Thanks, Dr. Klein. Dr. Mahindra, any final words from your standpoint?
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I mean, it's no one really knows what's going to happen in the coming months. There's a lot of uncertainty and things will change, both from the perspective of the healthcare workers and from the general public. So be mindful that it's going to be tricky for everyone to get through the next few months, but that you have a good support network in terms of if you have a primary care physician, if you have family members or a social support group, use them to help you be resilient and to stay safe and to stay healthy. If you're not sure if you can reach out to your primary care doctor or telehealth or even a walk-in clinic, because sometimes it is hard to really understand what's dangerous and what's not. But if you really are concerned, and obviously call 911 or go to the nearest emergency department. We're always open. We're always there to help. And if you're concerned about yourself or somebody else, that they're at risk of harming themselves, harming other people, or they're having trouble breathing, they keep vomiting, they can't keep things down, or they seem really in distress, then also get medical help right away. We're always here to help.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you to both of you for your wonderful advice and taking, we know you're very busy already, so taking your time this evening to really share and help out our community. Very much appreciated. And I wish you all health as well, and to be safe as you support our community and your patients as well. And I want to thank everyone who joined us this evening in support of as I said, our third house calls. We will be sharing out the recording in the coming days, I believe, for those that you may have missed or you want to share with others or have a replay. So thank you all. Be well and be safe.